When I was a very young, charming boy, wandering aimlessly through Soho's darker quarters in London, one often observed a band known as the Animals. They had strange accents and they were tough, and the singer was a terrible spotty face. His name was Eric Burden, and I remember him singing a song I didn't quite understand at the time, being barely 13, called The House of the Rising Sun. Of course, I understand it very well now, and have been to New Orleans, lived in New Orleans, and probably trod foot in such a place. However, to remind me and all those other crotchety old rock and roll antiques out there, here's Eric Burden and the Animals singing House of the Rising Sun. In New York City in 1980, walking along one of those Harlem streets, I noticed a guy across from me on the other side of the road, sporting a bright, huge yellow t-shirt. This man was enormous and black, naturally. But the t-shirt said, "Never mind the bollocks, here's the Sex Pistols." And I thought it was so odd seeing this t-shirt in Harlem worn by this big fat black dude. I had to cross the road and figure out where he was coming from. Said his name was Afrika Bambaataa, and asked me if I'd be intrigued enough to come to a party that night on a waste ground somewhere in an area known as the South Bronx. I did, but it took at least 2 hours because no taxi would take me there. One taxi finally did, but they made me wind up the windows, told me about putting the money in my socks, and I finally arrived on this virtual waste ground. Perhaps the goalposts, if you like, of this waste ground was 2 fired-out condominium blocks. The waste ground was filled with 1,000 young black dudes. I was the only white guy, and I have to say I was extremely nervous. But I wandered through pretending I was one of those awful irate A&R people that work for the record industry, and sort of trying to possess some air of discipline around myself and some sense of command. I wandered through until I found at the very end of this crowd a sort of trestle table with 2 turntables on it, and there was guys running around mixing music that seemed to be music by Gary Newman, whoever remembers him, music by the Monkees, whoever remembers them, music by Diana Ross, and music by the Godfather, who we know as James Brown. And all this stuff was all being piled together. People were taking styluses and finding grooves, and somehow constantly with their hands flicking backwards and forwards and hearing little segments. It was a fantastic sound, and it reminded me of like a new kind of techno guitar sound. But we didn't need guitars, and these guys didn't need to know how to play guitars. And in front of them there would be characters with microphones, singing, or rather I'd say chanting, or even talking. When they were talking, they sounded the best. They had a kind of rhythm to themselves. Meanwhile, Afrika Bambaataa was standing around protecting this gang who were basically, in my opinion, redistributing the music back from the powers that be into this milieu crowd, volatile crowd of black youths. It was very ecological, I thought. And at the dawn of the 80s, I thought that was a good sign that music now could be dragged out of your backroom cupboards and remade in another format. And there was a guy known as Grandmaster Flash in this particular fraternity doing similar things to Afrika Bambaataa and his gang. And later on, it turned me on enough to produce a song myself called Buffalo Gals, which in European eyes was kind of one of those early first majestic and leaders of this new spirit that became known as hip-hop. Grandmaster Flash and Afrika Bambaataa also made songs at that time. Afrika Bambaataa's song was Planet Rock and was before mine and before Grandmaster Flash's. And me and Grandmaster Flash, as history says it, went round the world with these two songs, which were of equal importance and were incredible hits. So, as a dedication to that moment that was given to me to watch, see, and be inspired by, I'm going to play you the song that Grandmaster Flash made an enormous hit and set the world alight with the new 80s hip-hop culture. It's called The Message.